Oh, hello. So wonderful of you to join me at my house. My name is Isabella Troche, and I've had a few things on my mind recently after taking my art history class. And one of those things happens to be the statue of David, which I'm going to talk to you about at length. Most people are familiar with Michelangelo's statue of David. Maybe not by name, but definitely in seeing it either in the media or in different artworks. This thing is absolutely everywhere, and it's beautiful. And that's, I think, one of the main reasons that we still appreciate it. It was unveiled in 1504 in Florence and was actually meant for the Cathedral di Santa Maria del Fiore over in Florence. It's not there anymore. It is currently at the Galleria di Accademia in Florence. And although it's always stayed in Florence, the journey of how this statue went from supposedly the top of a cathedral to now being in one of the most popular galleries in Italy is kind of wild. So I'm going to break down that story for you. Let's talk about what this statue is actually meant to represent, who this character of David actually is. So the statue of David actually tells the story of the Philistines and the Israelites, and it's a biblical story. The Philistines are attacking the Israelites, and it seems like all hope is lost, and the Israelites are going to fall to the Philistines. However, a young shepherd named David steps up to the task to face this giant man named Goliath. Before facing off against Goliath, David actually strips off all of his armor, giving us a reason as to why David is always depicted naked. And he picks up a rock and loads it in his sling. And then the story goes that David uses the sling to blind the giant Goliath and uses Goliath's own sword to behead him, and the Israelites are triumphant against the Philistines. At only 26 years old, Michelangelo was commissioned to create the statue of David after his success in Rome with the Pietà, where two figures were first carved out of one piece of marble, which is something that is really hard to do. Even before Michelangelo started carving the statue of David out of this piece of marble, the piece of marble itself was already quite iconic in the area as well. 40 years previous, another artist had tried to carve something out of this giant white 20-foot tall piece of marble known as the White Giant. And it was handed down to Michelangelo at only 26 years old, and he just had to deal with it. And he was successful, which is great. The statue was actually meant to be premiered on the Cathedral de Santa Maria del Fiore, um, kind of on like its northern side, and it was meant to accompany, I believe, 12 other biblical figures who were carved out of marble. But after seeing it revealed, the Florentine government was like, "That's too beautiful. Everyone needs to see this up close and personal because of how much detail Michelangelo was able to put into this piece of marble." After seeing the completed artwork, Florentine officials decided to put the statue in the Palazzo della Signoria for the entire public to see and admire. And this was also a kind of head of government for the city of Florence as well. So it was a very noteworthy statue. And this move, it still kept its religious context, but it moved it definitely more into a political sphere, the reasons of which we're going to discuss now. The Republic of Florence actually commissioned Michelangelo to make this statue after a very tumultuous 15th century in Florence. They were fresh off the heels of finally getting rid of the Medici family. The Medici were quite a notorious family, and they became extremely rich and influential, first of all being bankers, and then almost having a sort of wealth in favors and political influence due to their involvement with the arts and certain councils. They pulled many strings. A few of these sons and cousins ended up being popes or bishops or archbishops. They were heavily involved in the church, and they used any means they could to gain power within the city. And it was pretty much run like a cartel, with the head of the family being Lorenzo de' Medici for most of it. Quite a notorious time for Florence. And then at the end of the 15th century, we had the monk Savonarola, which I don't even know where he came from, but I guess in a response to humanism, he decided that we needed to burn books and paintings and anything that was deemed as like an earthly value or a sin. And they finally got rid of Savonarola. So when this statue was commissioned, it was very much in response to the defeat of the Medici and the survival of humanism within Florence. Funnily enough, the Medici also had a statue of David in their garden, and this was a private commission for Donatello, which was unveiled in 1440. So, about 20 years previous to the premiere of Michelangelo's David. And this David is a really interesting contrast to Michelangelo's. Uh, it's a lot smaller, it's bronze. Uh, the David almost seems like a more boyish figure. However, he is already triumphant over Goliath. He is shown with his sword in hand and standing on the giant's head, kind of almost like the Medici's like ego and pride worked its way into the artwork, saying that they had defeated, they had won this city. Whereas Michelangelo's David is shown in this moment just before facing Goliath. His body is still in this moment of movement, like he's just catching his first glimpse of Goliath. But his face is still very aloof and blank. The scene hasn't unfurled yet, so it's still uncertain whether or not he will turn out this time. Every time you view this statue, it is once again retelling that story of defeating the Goliath. The Florentines really connected with Michelangelo's David as this image of the underdog, as being able to face off against any enemy, whether it is the Medici or a Goliath or Savonarola, any attack on their rights. They saw David as a pillar of hope against these kinds of enemies. This statue also being commissioned after Savonarola, I think, says a lot about the Renaissance in terms of its importance on humanism. Humanism is really the lifeblood of the Renaissance. This reinterest in the ancient Greek and Roman world, especially in Florence at this time, a huge interest in the ancient Roman Republic. Figures like Seneca and Cicero became so important to them, and even figures like Homer, although we don't know if Homer really existed. People like Petrarch wrote letters to these people. The ancient Greek world was huge to them, it was everything. So David being commissioned and done in this style of ancient Greek and Roman statue, specifically ancient Roman statue, because it is in marble instead of bronze, really speaks to the survival of humanism, and not just that survival, but its ability to thrive in this republic. Before I continue on with my formal analysis of the statue, I just wanted to show a bit of scale as to how big David actually is. It's the statue itself is 17 feet tall, which is roughly the bottom of that door down there to the gutter of this house. I am just below 5 feet tall. I am not even 1/3 of the statue of David. That is a behemoth. I don't know if you know how big 17 feet is, but it's big as fuck. So as we can see, the statue is made of white marble, but there's another really key element to this statue as well, and that is something known as contrapposto or contrapposto style, which was invented by Polyclitus in roughly 440 BCE. And before that, kind of archaic ancient Greek and Egyptian statues would stand with both of their weight evenly planted on both feet and their hands really stiffly at their sides, along with really kind of blank, almost ghostly faces. And what Polyclitus did was he emphasized the fact that the weight, like a normal human, should be on one leg, particularly, and also with more dynamic lines within the body and a reduced waist to hip ratio on one side. Typically, if this pose was a little bit more unbalanced in kind of a bronze or marble statue, something like a spear could be added here for a warrior. But mostly, especially with David, we see the really reduced waist to hip ratio and kind of an aloof look on his face. He's looking away. There's lots of dynamic, changing lines within the body, which is kind of the epitome of the contrapposto style. I think we can really see the beauty that was put into Michelangelo's David, especially with the amount of detail, which I think is what caught the attention of so many Florentines at the time. Just the way you can see all of that veining, all of those beautiful muscles, the way that the movement in the body really shines. And I think no matter what perspective you take on this statue, there's always kind of a different expression on his face, almost like how the eyes of the Mona Lisa kind of follow you. You get a different emotion coming from David, whether you're looking at it from below or you have a camera angle of it from above. Sometimes he looks like he's pleading and worried, and the other times he looks much more determined and focused. And yet we know that his face is almost blank, is pretty much completely blank and aloof. So I think it makes this statue so much more interesting, so much more dynamic. Every time you look at it, there's almost something new to take from it. It really is the epitome of male beauty, and it has been viewed as such for over 500 years now. And it also can be seen as almost a pinnacle of masculinity. Within the past 20 years or so, the statue has actually been used in a few different advertising campaigns, some of which are fairly problematic, and other ones are just hilarious. And I don't know how they got past a board of directors who approved it. Back in 2007, the German Sports Federation actually hired an ad agency to create an ad campaign for them with the title, If You Don't Move, You Get Fat. And they actually used the image of the statue of David and photoshopped it to look like he was of a heavier weight than Michelangelo depicted him. I don't really know what they were trying to say about this. I mean, it's clear if you don't move, you get fat. But I guess from this we can see how people still view me like Michelangelo's David as this epitome of male beauty, as this extreme athletic physique to strive to. But just as we can now Photoshop images, Michelangelo carved this by hand to his ideal. This is not an attainable male figure without an extreme amount of exercise and dieting. And it's a statue of a biblical figure. It's meant to look godlike. If you're going to use that to against people, to shame obese people, to shame people who don't work out, that's just putrid in my eyes, and I don't like it. Sorry, excuse me. I'm not done yet. I'm not done. Hi. So the statue was again used in an advertisement in 2014, this time by an Illinois-based arms company who edited a photo of the statue with an assault rifle in hand to advertise their new AR-51, a bunch of letters I didn't bother memorizing. And the Italian government had it taken down very quickly. Not really sure what the message of the ad campaign was supposed to be, but I don't like it either. On a much nicer note, in August of 2020, the magazine GQ Italia actually used the image of David again in an advertisement, but this one was a little bit more creative. There's a lot of things in my hands. And instead, this time they made a kind of like a shifting magazine cover with the image of Pietro Boselli in it, who is an exquisite Italian model. If you didn't know. And the photo cover of the magazine actually shifted between a picture of David and a near identical image of Pietro Boselli in a black and white photo posed the same way. The Italian government did sue the hell out of them, but the magazine company won because it was just that good. And, when things are pretty, it's not so bad. No matter how we feel about these advertisements, I believe the use of the Statue of David in all of these advertising campaigns can really point to the iconography of David and how much Renaissance artwork really works its way into mainstream media. Whether the message is David as a warrior or a pinnacle of beauty or an underdog, his image is constantly what we associate with those things. And I really do admire the beauty of this artwork, and I think Michelangelo's artwork will stand to be one of the greatest in human history. There are, of course, some really problematic connotations with the fact that we emphasize Western art as kind of the epitome of art, especially within the Renaissance. There are a lot of problematic things associated with things in Western culture being considered the best. But when it comes to Michelangelo, I think a lot of his artworks kind of really connect with us on a really deep human level, and because of how they resemble humanism. And I just think it's a really beautiful statue, and I think there's a lot for us to gain and a lot for us to learn from David. There's a lot of history imbued in the creation of this statue, and I think there's a lot of history still to be created. So I'm going to go brush my rabbit because it's almost summer and he's shedding, as you can see. And I'm going to go edit this video. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for a wonderful art history course, and I'll catch you next Monday.